I would say it's never a lost cause to deliberate, because the future of the WTO and the rules-based trade system is dependent on addressing the issue of subsidies. But that issue can't be addressed unless we understand where they are and how they're affecting global competition. So shedding light on subsidies, understanding how countries are using them and how they're affecting global competition is critical at this stage, so that the deliberations have the proper information to be able to address those subsidies. So too much, I mean, as I said, too much is at stake. A lot of these are hidden. There's different ways of providing subsidies, whether it's subsidized lending, whether it's cheap rental rates. So they can come in many different shapes and forms, or direct payments between firms, soft budget constraints on state-owned enterprises. So there's all different forms that subsidies can take. And I think that's what makes it so complex. But we have to start somewhere. And so I think it is worth it. And ultimately, to get it right, it will be up to the national governments to actually provide that information. And I think one thing that's particularly challenging about subsidies is that some countries are more transparent than others about how they're provided. And the problem with that is then you may end up seeing more subsidies in the more transparent countries, but it's not the real picture. It's just because there's more light shown on the subsidies in those countries. So you could think of something like research and development, where companies may not invest enough because some of the returns can go to copycat firms. So they don't get the full benefits of that research. So encouraging research and development is something that governments have often done. Similarly, in environmental goods, which obviously have huge spillovers in terms of saving resources, it makes sense to subsidize those goods. The problem is when they have adverse effects on competition, when subsidies target specific firms or specific industries in a way that keeps other firms, whether in the same country or in other countries, out. But the issue at the global level is about unfair subsidies that obstruct global competition, prevent firms from competing even in their own market, foreign firms that prevent firms from competing fairly in their own market or in third-party markets. Because there's so many different forms that even if we're transparent about the way subsidies are supporting firms, there has to be a way to make that data standardized so that it's comparable, because you don't want to compare apples to oranges, and not all the subsidies have the same types of effects. So that's once you have the data, transforming it into some sort of ad valorem, the percent, that the firm is benefiting from these subsidies as a percent of its revenues or its trade, or something standardized, would be really critical. first step, as you said, is measuring them and making them comparable. And then the second step would be some sort of agreement on how to rein them in. And I think agriculture provides some lessons here, a long subsidized industry where agreements have been made on the amounts governments are allowed to provide, and then restrictions to prevent those subsidies from encouraging production, but rather to help support in bad times for farmers, so not to be production based. And so I think there's some lessons from agriculture that could be taken for industry, but of course, we're many steps back from that starting point now with just trying to even understand what they are. But governments have to be willing to do this. And I think, again, so much is at stake in terms of global trade and an open rules-based trading system that governments should want to try and get this right. Be transparent and provide the information, because that will make it so much easier to really get this going. And then next, to think about how we can create a fair environment. We want governments to have this, sovereignty to do what they want in their countries, but it shouldn't be such that it affects global competition. I think it's a particularly difficult time to get, in a certain way, it's a good time, in a certain way, it's a difficult time right now. It's a good time because many of the industries where subsidies have been a problem, such as steel and aluminum, are thriving right now, and it's easier to address things when there's actually strong demand. So you don't need the subsidies to prop them up. On the other hand, it's a difficult time because the amount of subsidies governments are throwing at industries, many of which are warranted to help support these industries in difficult time, are also really high. So it's a good time, a bad time. And then, of course, there's other pressing issues, with getting the vaccine out, et cetera, and making the addressing health and safety concerns that are much more pressing for governments. So we'll see where this goes, but this is certainly a critical issue for trade and for the trade system. And I'm thrilled to see the work that Simon and the GTA are doing. Someone has to do it. It's tedious work. It's God's work. And, big thanks to Simon and the team.